I'm a DJ boy, going to Dcentral, minting NFT, farming DeFi, being crypto poor but JPay rich.
So without further ado, let me introduce the moderator for our panel, Nathan Smale.
So Bianca stole most of my introduction, so that's good. I'm Nathan Smale, Director of Emfarsis. We're an investment and advisory firm focused on the play-to-earn ecosystem in emerging economies. But today I'm here to talk to you about interoperability, connecting the chains. The current ecosystem we have is made up of a whole range of layer 1 and layer 2 blockchains, and each one of them is really fighting to gain traction in the market, and I see that directly in play-to-earn gaming, but also in DeFi we're seeing new projects and new protocols pop up constantly. This competition leads to a great deal of innovation, but also can cause a lot of headaches from developers looking to pick the right chain so that they can access liquidity and a user base, to users having to have a whole host of wallets. That's the solution to that is interoperability, which is the ability to exchange and utilize information and assets between two systems. Sounds easy, right? As it turns out, it's not. It can be quite a pain. Our panelists who we've got today are all working on projects to really make that easier for everyone in the ecosystem. So if I'll invite our panelists on stage. Thanks, guys. We'll start with some quick introductions. So if you could introduce yourself, your company. Really keen to hear how your project it plays a role in that interoperability that we just talked about. So, Karel, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Karel, Composable CTO. My background is in systems engineering. I'm a Rust maximalist, contributor to Substrate, Near, and some other projects. At Composable, we're really trying to build the future of cross-chain infrastructure with longevity in mind. Right now, we see a lot of ad hoc solutions in the bridging ecosystems that do work really well and do provide the products that people are looking for, but we're not yet seeing a system that properly abstracts over all ecosystems and that provides both the security guarantees as well as the UX that we're really looking for. I'm thinking that the next bull market, next cycle, we're actually going to see this become a reality and also start seeing people stop us being associated with a specific ecosystem. And instead, all of a sudden, apps being abstracted over multiple ones, where you no longer know where the backing chain really is.
I like that. My name is Dakota Barnett. I'm the NFT throwing up a rainbow behind me. Nice to meet you all. I'm the founder of InvArch. InvArch is, I say it's kind of a new kind of blockchain focused around intellectual property, funding, but more importantly, cross-chain authentication of assets. So we're kind of all familiar with an NFT and this immutable record of ownership, that CID. But what we are realizing is the actual ability to have plagiarism resistant, if not proof, assets as well. They're pegged to those CIDs. So really exciting there. Our big role in interoperability, though, is really kind of tapping into and hacking around a lot of the infrastructure and systems that are in place or that are being built by other teams in order to realize this vision and kind of showcase a extremely powerful byproduct of interoperability to make the future of Web3 something that's a lot more powerful and significant than it is today by introducing a new class of assets that hopefully will allow us to unlock a new world of possibilities for everyone.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to the organizers. My name is Liam. I help out with business development at EVMOS, helping to build the EVMOS ecosystem. Now, you might be asking, what is EVMOS? In its simplest form, we are bringing EVM or Ethereum compatibility to the Cosmos ecosystem. Now, really what we're trying to do is go much further beyond that. It feels like there's a new EVM environment popping up every week or so, and they're all really focused on one thing and one thing only, which is scalability. And scalability is certainly something that's important and certainly something that we do want to spend time on. But we also wanted to introduce this idea of interoperability and how can we enable not just multi-chain applications, but also cross-chain applications so that you can write all of your contracts in Solidity, deploy them to EVMOS, but then still be able to interact with any other EVM or Cosmos environment. Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Sergey from Axelar. So what we're doing is building and delivering infrastructure to really create this interoperable cross-chain Web3, right? So we're building infrastructure, we're building networks, we're building, routing, translation protocols, kind of transport layers, and yeah, so I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. Now, obviously you guys are all very close to the issue of interoperability. But for the audience who might be less aware, it sounds great. Why wouldn't we just have interoperability today? But what are some of the barriers that we're facing? Is it purely technical? Are they human? What are some of the barriers that we're working through? And Karel, what's up with you?
So I think we're facing barriers both on the UX side as well as on the technical side. There are some unanswered questions in the multi-chain thesis around the security of light client-based bridges. What happens when you have a 51% attack, a chain reorganization? We haven't really seen those in practice yet that often. But still, those do offer a threat to all bridges out there. That's why I'm really bullish on Tendermint, Beefy, Babe, basically chains that provide deterministic finality because they basically solve that problem. Routing for ETH 2.0 because that's what we really need to do proper bridging within the Ethereum ecosystem. The next problem is UX, where in the previous cycle we saw that it was basically impossible to leave an ecosystem. Now we're seeing that you can definitely bridge out your own funds and start playing around in different ecosystems. But if I may use Web 2 analogies, instead of Slack making a lot of API requests for you and integrating new products, basically currently your products ask you to do those API calls yourself, then go back to your main product, register that you've done so, and you're doing all of these steps by yourself. Well, what I'd really like to see is the capability for smart contracts to dial into other chains, do DeFi interactions there, while giving the user the one interface, right? They're doing xyz.farm, and they don't necessarily realize that it's actually backed by 20 different chains all trustlessly. And part of that is possible right now, part of that isn't yet, and I think that's kind of where the ecosystem should move to. Perhaps a couple more years, and then we're there.
So I agree. It's definitely a back-end and front-end issue. On the back end, see one thing that is a huge issue, and it always comes down to security, because there's a lot of other things that you can kind of hack around, but security is what you cannot hack around. People have tried to institute bridges in, I would say, ignorance of this, and it's only cost people like hundreds of millions of dollars, so no big deal. There needs to be a level of seriousness that's taken with this, and a lot of respect for the individuals up here because they take that very seriously when architecting these designs to do them correctly. But yeah, security is definitely a huge thing. ETH 2 is needed because the ecosystem there, the developer ecosystem is absolutely massive, and that's not going to go away. You'll see other ecosystems grow and you'll see the developer base grow, but Ethereum, whether you see ETH 2 as a golden savior or you see it as your grandfather, it's there and it's staying. And so are all the developers. However, with that, because now there's all these applications and dApps that are all built on top of it, and they can do amazing things, but they're not connected securely, soundly with other ecosystems, then it's this siloed chain. And it's almost kind of redundant against the greater Web3 vision. At least against interoperability, 100% goes against that greater mission. But coming back to like the front end side, like he was saying, be able to have these transactions to be able to bridge assets in one clean, like flush motion is extremely important, because I have myself, like I've gotten regular individuals who they've known nothing about even Bitcoin, but I want to get them into DeFi because the yields, inflation's bad. Let's try and get them to get into this mix. But when I do so, and I'm showing them how to move assets around different chains and how to bridge assets, they hate it. They're why would I do this? And I'm trying to tell them it's because you make money, but they're already disinterested, and it's because of the UX that they experience, and because of that, the UI that they experience. So that needs to be bridged, but first and foremost, you need to have systems in the back end that allow for these smooth transactions. So I know, for example, at Composable, with their Beefy Centauri, working on that. I want to, I guess, kind of shout out Polkadex, project in the Polkadot ecosystem. They have their Thea Bridge, which allows individuals to experience that in one transaction, to bridge and swap in one transaction, which I think is important. But ultimately, yeah, just security, the systems, the way that we design these things is really crucial. And I also think having a good sense of community between the builders is also extremely important to make sure that there is this unified mission in achieving true secure interoperability, one where you can't sacrifice security.
That's actually an interesting point to throw to you, Liam, with the communities and how they work together. I mean, you guys are working pretty hard to get Cosmos and ETH just humming and interoperating. How do you go from a community perspective to bring them together and get people on both sides cooperating?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because we're trying to cater to both the Cosmos community as well as the Ethereum community, kind of as a port of entry of sorts between these communities. We are not a bridge, right? We leverage bridges like Axelar or Composable to bridge those assets over, but then to interact with the greater Cosmos ecosystem or the greater EVM ecosystem, you can leverage EVMOS. But it's hard because, like, even just something as simple as wallets. If you're an Ethereum user, you're very familiar with using MetaMask. But then if you're a Cosmos user, you're very familiar with using Kepler. And so, you know, when we launched, unfortunately, we launched with support originally only just for MetaMask, with, you know, Kepler wallet to come soon after. But then the Cosmos community was really mad and frustrated because they weren't able to use the wallet user experience that they were familiar with. And just the build out that was required to support Kepler wallet meant that we had to actually change the key type that is supported in Kepler, since we use Ethereum keys, for instance. Or other concepts like explorers, right? We take explorers for granted, being able to just look up your transaction. But it's something that is really complicated for EVMOS because we have both Cosmos and Ethereum transactions. And so none of the Cosmos explorers are able to support both. None of the Ethereum explorers are able to support both. And so right now we have two different explorers depending on which type of transaction you're trying to look up. Right, and so we're investing a lot of time and money, quite frankly, just to build out this infrastructure, to go to the wallet teams and build out these pieces of functionality just because they're not able to support it themselves, and it's hard. And I don't think, it's something that I think we underestimated in the early days, and it's something that we are spending, I'd say, most of our resources on trying to make sure that both communities are able to use the tools and services that they are used to from those respective communities.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And Sergey, what are you seeing in terms of some of the current barriers to interoperability?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just to step back, I mean, I think it's good that we're talking about interoperability, but it almost came as a necessity, right? I think, you know, if you look at evolution of other, you know, networks, including like the internet and traditional systems, it's always like infrastructure is laid down first, and then you have applications that come 5-10 years later. I think, kind of to step back, I think interoperability came in as a necessity over the last like year in particular, where all these ecosystems being built, right? We've seen interesting activity, we've seen interesting traction, and then people are like, oh, we need interoperability, let's hook up something, you know, ad hoc, centralized, you know, put some crappy technology in the middle, lose 300 million here, 600 million there, right? It's like, you know, what's the big deal? But so that's the problem, right? Where infrastructure is just catching up. But I think the exciting part are all the use cases. And so I do think the challenge over the next, you know, still year to come or year to two is like laying down the foundational infrastructure that can really stand there for decades, right? Not for years, not for months. Be robust, you know, be secure, as you know, everyone said. I think security is critical in these pieces of infrastructure. But even what we're doing now, it's, you know, it's very, very early, right? And once you have that, you know, user experiences and everything else, you know, something we're going to have to work very hard on. including things like making, wallets cross-chain enabled, right? Having a user flip between the wallets and flipping their transactions and, trying to figure out what's the difference between the wallet types, address types, like that's not going to get you to, 1 billion users on the retail side. So those experiences have to be abstracted, but, we still have a little bit of work on the kind of ground infrastructure layer until that can really click.
Awesome. I think we can all agree that we'd like to stop seeing $300 million exploits. But kind of touching on you've nearly all mentioned security as one of the big issues. There's a little bit of, I guess, competition on the panel, but you guys are all, seem like you all know each other and collaborate. For the general public's knowledge, like what is the industry doing to harmonize and standardize around some of these things, or is it each project trying to come up with the perfect secure solution? What are you guys seeing from an industry?
First of all, I don't necessarily think that we are competitors, because I think within the cross-chain thesis, either cross-chain wins and we get a lot of very successful chains bridged together, or we lose to ZK rollups and we have one layer that's super scalable. If you've got bridges, it's not good for you to be bridged to chains that aren't doing well. So I'd love for everyone here to do really well. Standardization-wise, I think that within Cosmos we're seeing a lot of great work there. IBC is like probably the nicest standard for the low-level bridging. What worries me a lot is that a lot of work has been done so far on bridging already with ad hoc solutions that basically combine a lot of different layers into one solution. So you don't necessarily have the one secure bridge capable of transporting data across chains and then a monetary transfer protocol with disputing built on top of that. No, bridges are very monolithic applications where if their lower level security is cracked, funds get lost, you're not necessarily able to securely message pass on top of them. So for me at least, the Tendermint guys did and the IBC guys did is taking a step back, realizing what is the separation of concerns and building out on top of that. And now I feel like overall projects are doing the same. They're taking that step back again, they've seen the initial traction, and now we're going back to remodel bridges, remodel infrastructure.
So I still kind of step on the same note is, I like to think it's not competition. Me specifically, well, InvArch specifically, not a competition, more so very closely watching the development of these teams, because with their success comes our success. So just bring it back to cross-chain authentication, that real quick. So, because what we're achieving there is tapping into these bridges, and we're not necessarily always, which is good, we're not necessarily looking to always move the actual tokens or actual value. Sometimes we're just looking to send messages to transfer information in itself, because there's a lot of powerful applications, use cases that get realized as a result. So it's extremely important for, I would say, everyone to, well, let me bring it back actually. So like I was saying, the communication of everything, that is very key. That is huge. It's good to work together, but it's also good to make sure that individuals, again, like I said earlier, are working together with some common purpose, and you can't sacrifice security because of those exploits. But yet with the success of other projects comes the success of greater possibilities. I would say that even with, if there was ZK1, you lose. That's a shame if that happens, because you lose out on so many possibilities, because now we are contributing to, scalable or not, this one siloed environment, when the reality is that there will always be other environments. I think that's come to be a truth, is that there will always be other ecosystems, whether or not as a community we agree with that. It doesn't matter, they're going to exist and applications are going to be built, and you can't stop that. But what you can do is build for a future where you expect that, and build for a future where you're building to connect these things securely and soundly, so that the application layer, you can build exciting apps that kind of look at all these different protocols like little Lego pieces. And you're able to take components, and I'm able to utilize different aspects that it's only possible here, and this is possible over here. But if I can combine these, different mechanisms together at the application layer, if I could tap into them all, well, then you create extraordinarily powerful applications. This will be extremely easy in the Polkadot ecosystem, but again, that's one ecosystem. there's Cosmos. It's going nowhere. Polkadot's going nowhere. Cosmos is going nowhere. Ethereum's going nowhere. So it's definitely important to make sure that we're building towards this future with all of them in mind.
Just to tie back into what you said about going to monolithic rollups, we lose the distributed and decentralized nature. Like, we have blockchain against censorship, against large state organizations trying to control finance. Rollups, scalable, but we do give up that sense of security. And I think multi-chain is actually the continuation of being censorship resistant.
I mean, I think even like composability, right? Like in rollups and ZKs becomes harder across them, right? So, you know, interoperability there is still going to be needed, just on a different layer potentially. But I think, yeah, to what, you know, everyone is saying, I think like we're still so like early in the ecosystem that, you know, we're seeing, you know, these chains. We're probably going to see a lot more. We're going to see a lot more ecosystems. And I do think, you know, standardization and kind of layering of different mechanics that are behind the scenes happening behind the interoperability solutions is needed, right? We actually recently wrote a blog where we try to kind of decouple 4 layers that are needed to kind of think about interoperability, everything from a base layer to kind of transport layer, authentication layer, and then message semantics, right? I do think that, you know, as people that are working in the field, we should quickly try to agree at least on things like message semantics, because that means the applications can continue being built with different, you know, technologies underneath it and be able to kind of swap and plug and play, right? As more solutions are available or better, you know, technologies is rolled out. So I do think kind of the message semantics layer is going to standardize over the next kind of year. That would enable the applications to continue building with various, you know, approaches back in them underneath.
And sorry, just to jump in, is anyone actually working on that message standardization, and how collectively are they bringing everyone in the ecosystem into contributing?
So I know there are some groups that are starting to do this. We actually kicking off, you know, an effort to standardize some cross-chain protocols for kind of EVM compatibility. So, you know, I'll actually be, you know, inviting people to join some of these community calls. We're putting a short standard sometime this or next week, and then, you know, we want to invite all the community members to kind of give feedback and, you know, help us, you know, along those lines. So yeah, I mean, I think it's early, right? Like, I think we're just at the point where, you know, you can do things like sending messages right across chains. You know, a year ago, like, nobody really talked about that. So, you know, I think this would be kind of the theme probably over the next year.
One danger you have, or not necessarily danger, is we have a lot of people developing standards right now. So it's going to be another competing standard. Probably going to see a boom of standards first, and then the cut down again to see which one actually works out the best and survives. And then shamefully, sometimes it's not the best one that survives, but simply the one that got the most traction early on. So I'm rooting for us to actually get the best one out there ASAP and develop this nicely.
And I think this actually ties in nicely to just the kind of debate of like EVM versus like Rust environments, because the EVM environment has become a standard of sorts. You know, Rust is, you know, forever increasing, and a lot more ecosystems are adopting it, but there's still a big steep learning curve. Just one, learning the development of building in Rust environments like Cosmwasm or Substrate, or just building the tools to support it. You know, one thing that's really nice about, you know, bringing the EVM compatibility with EVMOS is just we get to tap into all the Oracle providers, you know, that applications are used to, like Chainlink right off the bat, or indexers like the Graph and Covalent, or multisigs like Gnosis, right? Like, people complain about the multisigs in the Cosmos ecosystem all the time, just because, like, you pretty much entirely have to use the CLI command line for it. There's no good UIs for it. Just the functionality of it is really poor, but we're able to introduce that. We're able to introduce Gnosis Safe with EVMOS, and I think by, you know, bringing those tools and those familiarity to an ecosystem really just helps kickstart it. And we've seen that with like the Avalanche ecosystem in their C chain. Almost all of their activity is on C chain. With Polkadot and their Moonbeam or Aurora and Near, you know, the EVM compatibility, you know, might not necessarily be the best technology solution, but it has kind of risen so far as a standard of sorts.
I would, however, be really sad if in 10 years' time the future of finance is built on top of a language that got ripped from JavaScript, the EVM that got built in a fairly short amount of time.
So I think it's, I just want to add, it's kind of to agree with that. EVM is now, but according to the man who created Solidity, it's not the future.
Time will tell.
So we can't quite all agree on everything just yet. We got a little bit of ways to go.
It's a lot easier. Don't get me wrong. It's so much easier right now. If someone wanted to get into blockchain and they were like, look, I've made like maybe some simple backend apps, or I've made a website or something, like I want to get into the space. Yeah, okay, granted, Rust, a bit more of a learning curve, and the documentation is not as friendly right now. But still early with things. So I mean, Solidity day one probably wasn't the greatest, but you give it time, you give it resources and community support, and things build up. So I do think that, I know for a fact we're going to be seeing more and more of that with Rust, with Substrate, with CosmWasm. Should have called that Wasmos. But my bad, always. But you'll see this greater adoption and these tools. And to one point, there will be, I think, the standardization, but in the same way that you're able to, different languages are specific for, some languages are better at different things compared to others, and sometimes those things are really niche, but nonetheless they exist, and you see some languages take superiority. So like, I don't think Solidity will ever go away, no. But I do think that Rust has the clear potential to provide a more secure foundation for future applications and blockchains.
And maybe just one quick addition also is that, you know, we are not by any means like Solidity maxis, and because like with this cross-chain future, we really believe that you should be able to build your EVM application on EVMOS, but have it interact with CosmWasm contracts, right? And so this is something that we're spending these resources on so that you can have that optionality and flexibility if you want to continue to use that EVM environment.
Now, I will just jump in. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Things have come a long way in the last kind of year or so. Quite a lot of the chains have really started to get some traction. We're seeing good inroads to interoperability. But we'll go through, with the last couple of minutes remaining, what do you see as the goal for interoperability in our space in 12 months? What does it actually look like? Sergey, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, over the next 12 months, I mean, I do think we're going to continue building this core kind of connectivity infrastructure, right? Maybe some of the kind of user experiences of interacting across these chains will be easier, but I think, you know, it's still going to be early. The end goal, you know, kind of 3-5 years from now is that, at least from a user perspective, you don't have to think about all those issues, right? Because the Solidity is addressed. You know, I find myself more and more often when I visit an application, like asking like what chains is actually deployed on, which, you know, is a good question to ask, but most users don't care. That's a reality, right? Like most users want to trust the developer that they actually build on the best environment for where their application needs to be hosted, that it is a secure environment and it can compose and they can interact with it from arbitrary wallets or arbitrary ecosystems, right? So, I mean, I don't think we'll quite get there over the next, you know, year, but that's the goal that I think, you know, a lot of us are working towards, which, you know, I'm super excited about.
Yeah, definitely want to echo that from Sergey. I mean, with Cosmos, there's a lot of effort on what are called interchain accounts, making it possible to control your value even if it's on other Cosmos chains. And the goal should be that you don't care what chain it's on, right? That's a developer decision. Just like, you know, developers are the ones that decide whether they're using AWS or Google Cloud. It's not users that are deciding that. And so there needs to be, and this comes down to kind of the standardization talk about earlier, about we all need to, you know, get on the same page of like, hey, where do we want to move forward so that we can move forward, even if it's not necessarily a perfect solution.
I also want to dive in. It's like, I like to think that sometimes, I'm usually wrong with these things. I like to think it could take a year or two, and then yeah, 3 to 5 would be a lot safer to say. But there's also like 2 ways of looking at this, or 2 ways of approaching it. I think that you can't sacrifice security when it comes to establishing the foundation for interoperability, but outside of that, you are able to hack around a lot of other things. Like you have, I know this guy to my right knows a good bit about it, but like, there's a lot of research into, I guess, consensus agnostic smart contracts, which is very important. Chainlink, specifically speaking with them, I should have said that or not, working with that and stuff. But it's important to understand that there's different ways to go about this, but I would like to say like a year or two from now, there's a pretty well-established foundation in place, and then I would like to see maybe the years after, it's just on improving it and making it even more robust, or maybe we're realizing new use cases and applications, so we're trying to develop and open up new, more efficient channels of communication for those instances. But yeah, I like to think 2 years from now, I like to imagine a highly connected ecosystem, almost like I kind of imagine like Washington D.C. It's one place. It's extremely diverse. There's all these different cultures and buildings and people and identities, but they're in an environment where they're able to cooperate together. So the same thing. There's all these different ecosystems. There's all these different environments. But 2 years from now, seeing developers being able to build and tap into these things like Legos, but then also like with InvArch, I didn't want to talk about it too much about it, but cross-chain authentication, realizing this system underneath, hacking into interoperability in order to create, like I said, piracy proof or plagiarism impossible assets, to where, you know, if you do rip the JPEG 24 seconds later, it's no good across Web3. You know what I mean? Or you steal this music, or you rip that video and 24 seconds later, it's no good, you can't use it in this application. You know what I mean? Seeing these new unrealized use cases, I think, is what will be the most exciting of all.
Yeah, then just to conclude, I think we have the right direction. We need bridges to do secure message passing. We're going to get to this future where we have those guarantees. I think the next step from that on is dispute mechanism systems to figure out systematic risks within cross-chain DeFi. What happens to your chain if you're accepting Luna as a governance token, right? And how do you quickly shut down bridges, pools, when all of a sudden 6 trillion more get minted at a very low floor price? So far, this is all very ad hoc. And I think the best monitoring systems right now basically use Twitter and wait for someone to say, hey, this doesn't look right at the moment. Which compared to TradFi is absolutely unacceptable, to be honest. And once within your own chain, you do have a sense of control, you do have an understanding of the risk associated with it. When you create a new pool in your DEX, you know, all right, like I'm bringing in these 2 tokens, you can read the contracts. But once you go cross-chain, this becomes a lot more difficult, because not only is it enough to read the contracts on that other chain, what happens if they change their VM? And all of a sudden they do contract upgrades, or they're not even using smart contracts, but they're app chains, and they can arbitrarily change the semantics of their token whenever they want. I think for that, like, we're kind of going to see new projects arise. So if you're in the space and think you might have a nice solution for this, contact me, because I'm super interested in this. It's going a bit more into getting DeFi at least regulated, controlled, and properly monitored.
All right, thank you so much for your time today, gents. It's so good to hear that you guys are actually all creating these conversations and interacting together. I think it's very hopeful for the future of interoperability. So, Karel, Dakota, Liam, Sergey, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, and great accent. You know?
Yeah, thank you.